Welcome back to the Cycle Report. Today I'm riding a Triumph Street Twin. Now, you might mistake a Triumph Street Twin for another name for their Bonneville, and that would be quite understandable. But truth be told, there's a lot going on here that's a lot different than what they've been doing for many, many years. This is such an interesting medium point because they take the basis of their old school bike, but they just modernized everything. With the Street Twin, they have gone away from being obsessed with every single detail about being authentic and taken some liberties. So things like the headlight bucket doesn't have to be chrome anymore, and the stamped steel headlight bracket can now be an aluminum piece that's painted a satin silver. The gauges can still have sort of a retro flair, but not look authentically 1970s or 60s. This has ABS and traction control. It has modern amenities. It's just not crippled by them. And that theme goes everywhere across this motorcycle. Especially to the most controversial part is the engine. For decades, the Bonneville lineup has been powered by an 865cc or 900, depending on which model it is, parallel twin. It's been air-cooled, with sometimes have an oil cooler attached to it, but it's been thoroughly old school. This marks a departure into the modern era. It is water-cooled. It has a radiator between the upright frame rails. It's still a parallel twin. It is a true 900cc now. And usually, like Porsche, when a manufacturer goes to this kind of setup in an engine instead of their old tried and true old school, it gets more powerful, it gets more... No, the horsepower is actually down on this. I think it's about 55 horsepower. But they've moved the torque up. So while it doesn't make the stat sheet look that impressive, this kind of motorcycle, you ride around and you're short shifting, you're not redlining every gear, and the actually lower, torqueier motor is outstanding. About 4 years ago, I rented a normal old school, it was like a 2013 Bonneville for a couple days in Southern California, and it was great. I didn't expect to be blown away by it, and I wasn't. But it was nice. It was charming, it looked good, it sounded pretty good, but the riding experience didn't really stick with me. Contrast to this motorcycle, I rode 1 mile, and I was already half in love with it. It's so charming and it has so much character that it's undeniably something special right off the bat. So let's get back to that engine. It is thoroughly modern with an old school setup, and it works. It's not about numbers. This is sort of their smaller entry-level bike, I guess, if you can call a 900 entry-level. And while most people will say that that's too much motorcycle for a beginner, I actually think this would be a really good beginner motorcycle. A 900 still sounds extreme, but this thing doesn't make a whole lot of power. And what it does do that a 250 or a 300 or 400cc doesn't do is it just pulls away very easily. This is the easiest motorcycle to ride I've ever ridden. And I mean, not just to keep it under control, it's just so simple. The clutch pull is like a pinky's worth of force. It's so nice and smooth. It's cable actuated, so it's just linear and it just has a nice gradation. The throttle is ride-by-wire, and it's probably the best ride-by-wire throttle I've ever experienced on a motorcycle. It's so nice and dialed in, and it's just seamless. You don't think about it, which is exactly what you want with something like that. The brakes are okay. They're not amazing. This is not a speed machine. It's not a sport bike. It's honestly not even the kind of bike that I would want to ride hard. And so the brakes are adequate. I think just last month they announced that the next year model will have better brakes, and I wouldn't say no to them, obviously, but in no way, shape, or form does this not have a good braking system. It's just fine. The transmission, however, is fantastic. It's a 5-speed unit. The gear spacing is perfect for the kind of riding this thing's made for, just kind of around town and back roads. And I must admit, there's been a lot of Triumph motorcycles that I've ridden that I thought the transmission was the weak point, or it's just garbage. They're really clunky, they're imprecise. This one has a really interesting feature where it is really easy and precise and direct and very smooth. But it's not so delicate like most Japanese bikes, or even like a KTM or a Ducati, where it's just like a toe tap will snick it in. This actually requires quite a bit of positive go. It's a hefty click, not clunky, but it feels more, I guess, kind of rifle bolt snicky, instead of did I even touch it, like a Honda or something. I actually like it, and it suits the character very well, because this retro style bike wants to be a little bit industrial, but doesn't make itself industrial that it's a problem. Ergonomically, this is not a large motorcycle, but I will say though, for being 6'2" on their smallest bike, when I'm riding it, it doesn't seem tiny to the point where I don't like riding it. The seating position's neutral, the handlebars are upright, and you have a lot of flexibility with the longer seat, so you can kind of move forward or move backward and find somewhere that suits you. The controls fall in the hand, and yeah, I mean, there's a bend to my knees that most people wouldn't experience, but I don't feel like it's too small for me to ride. The handling is really great. It flicks around through traffic and cuts through. It has a very positive centering experience. The center of gravity is really low, and so it always wants to kind of like stand up. Now, if you're turning in, it'll dive into a little turn, but any sort of throttle application, it wants to stand up, which I think is really good, because for a newer rider or a less aggressive rider who's not used to riding like a sport bike that'll dive into corners, that sometimes scares people if it gets too much of an angle too quickly. And if that's the situation, a little bit of throttle will stand it up and they'll feel safe again. The suspension is fine. Again, this isn't a sport bike and it's not a cruiser, so you want it to be comfortable enough to kind of puddle around town, but it's not really made to be the kind of motorcycle you're going to go cross country on. So there's no need for all-day comfort and compliance here. It soaks up bumps and potholes pretty well, but it's firm enough to feel direct and agile, so I think they did a great job. And it's not adjustable, but I don't need that either. I just hopped on and I rode it, and it's great. It's fine. Everything seems high-end at a really reasonable price considering how fancy this thing is. All of the fit and finish, the switchgear, the controls, the fasteners, the dials, the paint finish, everything is gorgeous. What you get for the money is fantastic. This particular bike has had the parts catalog thrown at it. Bar end mirrors, this little windscreen that does actually quite a good job of keeping wind off of your chest. This seat, which is absolutely gorgeous, I believe is not made by Triumph. It was sort of a thrown-on bundled accessory, as is this side bag, which is really handy. It looks cool. It's kind of an old-school Pony Express messenger style, and it's really good just to throw your phone in, or a couple little things if you had to pick something up on the way home from work. So it looks good, and let me tell you, it sounds good too. Triumph offers an aftermarket exhaust, I think made by Aero. But I'm going to tell you, I don't think it's necessary here. This is probably the best sounding stock motorcycle I've ever ridden. It has a nice low growl, it burbles, it kind of pops a little bit on deceleration, and I don't think I'd change it because I can hear it when I ride, and it sounds great from the side, but it's not obnoxious. It's not going to wake up your neighbors, but it's just loud enough that it's throaty and you always hear it. And the exhaust note is lovely. There's only one motorcycle I've ever ridden around that got more attention than this one does. I parked it at work the other day, and 3 different people came up and wanted to talk about it. And people who don't even like motorcycles, and they were just like, that thing is cool, asking me questions about it. And I've come in here with some cool stuff, but nothing like this has gathered the attention of just about everybody. It's charming, and everyone likes it. And that's kind of the theme all over. by walking away from actual, authentic, old school, they've gotten to a place where this is almost like a resto mod. You know, like we talk about the Singer 911s and the Icon Ford Broncos. And those are other companies trying to sort of reinvent what the original manufacturer did. But what Triumph's done here is they've made their own resto mod out of their other bike. And I think it's better than the other bike. And I think that this is actually probably my favorite bike in their lineup. So now, the kind of riding I see this doing the best is around town. I've been commuting on it. I took one leisurely road on a back roads on it, and it's great. So once you try to ride this thing hard, it becomes a little disappointing. But you just go back to what it's made for and just effortlessly zip it around, and it's lovely, and then you don't need any more. I don't yearn for more. And this is I'm someone who loves a fast motorcycle, but on this I just don't see the point. This is just so nice to kind of just cruise around on. And I am really not looking forward to giving the keys back up. I kind of want one of these. My cameraman does not generally like anything retro or old school or anything of the sort. And he rode this for about 15 minutes and he's like, I want one. And that's kind of the vibe. Everyone who rides this thing kind of wants one. And you might too. Quick pros and cons to recap. I love the engine. I love the ergonomics. I like the handling a lot. And I love just the charm and character it has. Oh, and by the way, have you seen it? Look at this thing. It is gorgeous. The detail, fit and finish, and quality of everything is absolutely spectacular. The cons list, the brakes are okay. The suspension is okay. And that's about it. It's just a really good bike. If you're in the market for any sort of standard bike and you're not looking for a sport bike and you don't really care about outright performance, you just want something that you'll enjoy and you will yearn to grab the keys for in the morning when you leave. Check this out. The Triumph Street Twin it's just so special. I am sadly on my way to return this, and it won't be with me anymore, and I'm taking the long way there. If that tells you anything about my impression of it, I think I might have to go park and just stare at it just one more time, though. While I do that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you for watching the Cycle Report again, and I'll see you next time.
You're watching Everyday Driver. We make a TV show, podcast,
and YouTube channels dedicated to great cars, driving adventures, and helping you find a car you'll love.
subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a thing.